It is a real honor to have you here today, Howard, and thank you for coming.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Okay. I want to start off with a question for you to share with the students about your servant leadership journey. How did you first get exposed to it, and how has it been for you to navigate that path, both on a personal and professional level?
Well, it's been almost 50 years since I first received the little orange pamphlet that was written by Robert Greenlee as the leader as servant. And I remember somebody giving me that booklet, and I read it, and I didn't understand it the first time I read it. But I related to something in it, and it kind of put into words things that I inherently believed in and acted on, but I didn't have the words for it. And I kept reading that little book over and over again, booklet over and over again. Finally, I think I got the message, and that's been 50 years. I'm 76, and I think I got that first pamphlet when I was 26. So that began my formal journey in servant leadership.
And how have you seen that play out, again, both in your personal and professional life?
Well, I think servant leadership is a way of living more than anything else. It is the core of who you become or want to become as a human being. And servant leadership is in the home, it's in the workplace, family, it's with friends, it's with your kids, it is your whole world, and you act on it the same in the workplace as you would in any other place in your life. And so it has been an integral part of my life. But the understanding that my role in life was to serve others, and by so doing, help them achieve what they want to get out of their lives, and by so doing, they'd help me. And it works. Okay. I'm an absolutely true believer. I've seen it work at Starbucks and seen it work at a couple other companies I was at too.
Okay. Yeah, and that comes to the question about, one of the issues I hear from students is while they might like the philosophy, they feel like by adopting that they would be overlooked for promotions, or they just wouldn't get noticed, or people weren't, senior executives wouldn't think they were strong enough. And I think this is particularly true for women that feel this way. So how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, servant leadership isn't some namby-pamby thing. Servant leadership is about performance. Robert Greenlee's main message was that servant leadership was about performance, that you had to turn in the performance. You had to do what you committed to do, and you're going to be evaluated on that performance. But it was how we got our performance, not on the backs of people, but with people. And so it's not some soft skill. It's a hard skill. And at the end of the day, for the most part, we all get evaluated on our performance, whether it's in our personal lives, if we're married and we have jobs to do in the home, like take out the garbage or whatever it happens to be, or to be, whatever you've committed to do with your significant other or spouse or with your kids, you got to do it. That's servant leadership, because you're going to be measured on that performance. At work, it's the same way. You're going to be measured on your performance, but it's how you get that performance. We all know the stories of the people that turn in the performance. They're the top in their sales field or whatever they happen to do. They're at the top of it, but they don't treat people well, and they're not liked in their organization, and eventually they get found out. And I think that GE was a great example of that. There's things that they did well at GE and things that they didn't do so well, but that was one of the things, is that you couldn't just be a performer. You also had to care about people. And so it is not some soft skill and that isn't about performance. It's a hard skill.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Let me give you another quick example. So it was it was hard to get fired at Starbucks for missing your numbers. You could go a couple of years missing your numbers and not get fired. But if you messed with the people, if you treated the people disrespectfully, you're going to get coached once or twice, and then you're going to be asked to find another place, because that was what drove the organization. And I stand by the performance of the organization. I mean, if there was ever an organization that's turned in the performance over the past 30 years, Starbucks is one. And yet we did it not on the backs of people. And that didn't mean we were perfect. We were not. And we made lots of mistakes and sometimes didn't treat people. But overall, treated people well, and the people, because of that, performed.
Good, good. I think that's a great example. So, you tell a story about, and I think this goes to persistence and courage, about the store manager that wanted to introduce a new product and ran into resistance from corporate. Would you mind sharing that with the students?
Sure. It was actually a young woman. Her name was Dina Campion. And matter of fact, she was with the company for 28 years and she just retired. Anyway, Dina was our first district manager in Southern California. And one day she called me up and said, Howard, can you come down and visit? And I'm a field guy, so I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And I wanted to see what was going on down the stores in Southern California. And she invited me to meet her at the First Street Promenade store in Santa Monica. And she sat me down and was talking about this product that another company in the Southern California market was serving. And she says, I'd like to take you over there to show you what they're doing. So she took me over there and she bought me one of their drinks. And she said, we're getting about 30 people a day coming into our store asking for a drink like this. Well, I'm not that smart, but I could multiply real quickly 30 drinks times $3, a day. That was, 90 times 7 is about 600 and some a week, times 52 weeks. That's about 30 grand a year. Well, our average store was doing about 600,000 at that time. So that was a 5% lift in volume. And she said, I think we can really, really do well here. And so I took her idea and I went back to Seattle and I said, here's what Dina would like to do. And I had this saying that the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. What I meant by that, you hire great people, then you got to listen to them. If they think you should have a different broom, that's the base example, then you should listen to them. If a district manager says, hey, this is a product we got to think about having, we should listen to them because that was their broom. And so I took it to Seattle and got up, called a meeting with everybody, and I presented the idea. And we went around the table. And the guy that was the head of marketing at the time, and he was the head of product development, he just said, Howard, I can appreciate Dina's commitment trying to increase the business at Starbucks, but that's just not something we're going to do. We're in the coffee business, and this product really isn't really about coffee that much. And so I pled my case a little bit, and then he was in charge, so I said, okay, fine. I went back to Dean. I said, you're going to be disappointed, but let's give it 6 months and we'll come back after it. So about 4 weeks later, I got another call from Dean and asked me to come down again. I asked her, Dina, what's this about? I was just there. She said, well, I'd like to show you something about that drink. I said, Dina, let's, you know what the answer is. She said, no, really, please come down. I said, I'm not going to make a special trip, but I have to be down there, look at some real estate in about 2 weeks. I'll stop by. Let's meet and we can talk about it some more. So I showed up at the store to meet her and she asked me to go sit down. Only this time she brought me 3 little sample cups of a beverage. And she said, Howard, take a sip of these. And I took a sip and I said, Dina, what are you trying to do? Get me fired? These tasted remarkably like that drink that we tasted in one of our competitors' stores. And she said, Howard, please let us try this. Please figure out a way to help let us try this. And, it's one of those times in life when in your leadership career, sometimes you go against, the status quo of the organization. Maybe you were told not to, but you say to yourself, well, I'm going to do it and then beg for forgiveness later. So I told Dina, okay, you can try it, but no signage and have your baristas tell everybody about the drink and not working, not getting at least 30 drinks a day per store, then we're going to stop. And you call me every night with the results. Not leave a message on my office phone. And she called me every night. First week it was 50 drinks a day per store. Second week it was 70 drinks a day per store. I mean, this was going to be a blowout. So I asked Dean and her team to come up to Seattle. And I'm thinking to myself, Howard, you're a genius. They're going to be flowing rose petals down at your feet when you bring this back. That was going to be a huge lift, over 10% lift in sales. So I invited her up and I called the meeting again with the head of marketing and This time I invited Howard Schultz, who was the CEO of the company, sat down, and Dina brought in the sample cups to serve everybody. Well, we went around the table, and there were some frowns, and there was one big, huge frown, and the guy that was the head of marketing, he kind of stood up and he came up to me and he pointed his finger at me and he said, "Behar, I told you we weren't going to do this. I'm in charge of product development. I want you to stop this right now." I just looked at Schultz and in my non-emotional way said, "Howard, give me 90 days. If you don't like it in 90 days, if you don't like the smell, we'll get rid of it." I said, "Here are the numbers." I said, "We can't afford to turn this down." So Dina and her broom. So you know what the broom is. It was Frappuccino. Dina's idea was Frappuccino. Frappuccino eventually became 20% of our business, and today it's a $4 billion business with inside of Starbucks, both fresh made in the stores and bottled beverage served internationally. The point of that story is you got to listen to your people. You never know where the idea is going to come from. Now, not every idea is going to be a $4 billion idea. Sometimes it's a little small thing like an adaptation of a piece of software or whatever it happens to be. But, we can't roll our eyes when people bring in ideas to us. We may say, "I don't have time to talk to you right now, but how about tomorrow morning?" But that's the idea behind
it. Yeah, that's a great story. So, you also have shared writings about how you went about determining what your values and your life vision is. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what point of your life that you went through that process?
Yeah. After I was introduced to servant leadership, I got promoted to vice president position in a company that I was working for, like Aaron Rentz, I think you still have Aaron Rentz in Georgia. Well, this was called Grand Tree Furniture Rental, and it was in the Northwest. And so I'm a guy without a college degree. I never thought I would ever be a vice president of a public company. And here I was getting that opportunity. And so they had parties for me and it was fun. And one day I was standing by the elevator and the chairman of the board came up to me. And he said, "Howard, I know I'm not the first to congratulate you, but I'd like to extend my congratulations. I know you're going to do a great job." And then he said that little 3-letter word, "but there's something I'd like to talk to you about." So his name was Walker Treese. I said, "Yeah, Walker, what is it?" He said, "Well, Howard, I know you want to be a great executive, and one of the things I've noticed about you is that you always wear your heart on your sleeve. Everybody knows what you're feeling and thinking all the time. Great executives don't do that. They kind of hold their cards close to their vest and they don't show their emotion. Try to keep their emotions under check." Well, I was always an emotional guy. I mean, as he was talking, I was thinking to myself, why did they promote me then? They knew who I was. Well, I went through a period of time trying to change myself. And I went through all sorts of tricks trying to be somebody different than I was. And I went from a guy in about 3-4 month period of time, a guy that loved his job, to a guy that hated his job because I was afraid that I wasn't going to be a great leader. Last thing I wanted to have happen. And so I got really depressed over it and I decided to leave the company. And so I told one of my coworkers that I was going to leave the company and he said, "No, let's go talk to Walker. He didn't mean everything he said." I said, "I was there. I know what he said." He meant every word. And the guy pulled me by my proverbial ear, said, "Let's go talk to Walker." And we did. And Walker did mean everything he said, but we made peace and I stayed for about another year. But, it taught me a valuable lesson. See, when Walker said to me, "Hey, you need to change," I didn't have any foundation to ask him a question. "Well, why do you think I should change, Walker? What is it about me that you don't think is productive?" And because I had never thought about Howard, so to speak. I was just Howie being Howie. Happy face, smiley face, doing what I love to do, but I never thought about my values. I never thought about my mission in life. I was just being me, without any plan. So somebody gave me this book that was about personal growth. I read the book, and the first chapter of the book said, "Identify your 8 to 10 core values." Okay, these are the things that matter to you of how you want to live your life. Doesn't mean there aren't more values that are part of your life, but these are the 8 to 10 core ones in your life. And so there was a list of about 300 values that was in this book, and I got it down to 50, and it was really difficult, believe it or not, to get it down to 8 or 10. It took me about 6 to 8 months to finally get it down. Then the second chapter of the book said, take those values and write out a definition for what each of those values mean to you. because a value is just a word until you define what it means. How does it inform the actions and the decisions that you make? And so I did that with my values. And then the third chapter of the book said, create a personal mission for yourself. And so I went through that, and it was a basic kind of mission. Like I wanted to be known as a great leader in the home furnishings industry, and I wrote that down. And I had my values written down, and I had the definitions of the values. And then the next chapter of the book said, describe in a paragraph or 4 or 5 sentences or some words how you want to live your life. So at that time, I came up with what I call my 6 Ps. Then the next chapter of the book say, create an operating plan for your life. Figure out what your life is about. What parts of your life have goals for? Your spirituality, your family, marriage, your work life, your career, your economic life, your children, etc. All the different headings in your life, and then create 2 to 3 goals under each of those headings that are going to drive your life over the next year or two. And so I did that, and I put it all together. And I have carried this around with me for 50 years. And here it is. This is covered in 50 words or less. There it is, right there. And I've carried around with me that long. I always have it in my briefcase. I have it on my iPad. I have it on my cell phone, and I always have it in front of me on my desk. So I never forget of why I'm here. I'll give you my personal mission statement. Is to live my life every day, nurturing and inspiring the human spirit, beginning with myself first and then for others. The reason why I say self first is what I've learned is that if you're not okay with you, it's very difficult to nurture and inspire anybody else's spirit. And then my core values are honesty, fairness, respect for self and others, responsibility, integrity, trust in self and others, caring and love. And then how I do everything are my 6 Ps. First P is with purpose. Got to be a purpose bigger than myself. The second P is if you have a purpose bigger than yourself, you do it with passion. You scream it from the highest mountaintop. And then you got to do it with persistence, because there's rocks in the rivers of our lives. And you got to be persistent about getting things done. Every entrepreneur that I've known that's been successful, they never give up. They don't know from the word no. And then the 4th P is patience. Not everything comes in the time frame you want it. So you have to have patience with other people, but you also have patience with yourself, because you can be the hardest on yourself. And then the 5th P is performance. What I was talking about before. Performance matters in life, whether it's in your married life, whether it's in your work life. It doesn't make any difference where it is. Performance matter. And we're getting measured every day. Significant other is measuring you. If you leave your socks on the floor, or if I leave the toilet seat up, I hear about it. Or at work, if I didn't turn in this product or the paperwork that I was supposed to get done in time, I was going to hear about it. Performance does matter, and we don't like getting measured, but the facts are we're going to be measured our whole life. And then the final P, the 6th P, is people. Everything we do in life is about people. There is no job that anybody will ever have that isn't about serving another human being, whether it's being a doctor, a lawyer, a fire chief, an engineer, an architect. Doesn't make any difference what you do in life. There's only one reason we're put on this earth, and that's to serve other people. And when we do that well, then it comes back to us in spades. So that's how I try to live my life. And then I have an operating plan. It's a 1, 3, and 5 year plan. That's getting pretty optimistic for a guy that's 77 years old.
Yeah.
Help him around to complete that 5-year plan.
Yeah, but that's great. I've got a question here. As a servant leader, how do you balance your goals and the goals of those you are leading?
Well, they should integrate. It's not my personal. I don't try to balance my personal goals with their personal goals, with the goals of the organization. It's not balance. It's more integration than balance. So I want to help the people that work in our organization to integrate their own values into the values of the organization, and for the organization to integrate its values with the people. And it works, because good people, we don't have all the same words for our values, but they kind of fit, and they always kind of fit at Starbucks. And the people that didn't, If you were somebody at Starbucks that your whole goal was to be rich in life and you didn't really care about people, you weren't going to last there. It's just the
Hmm.
way it was. Those people either left themselves or they got ejected, like Jim Collins says, a virus, a bad virus. That's the
Yeah.
way it was. And so you had to integrate your values into the organization. You'd still be you. You're still you, but you integrated your values into the organization. And I didn't want to work with anybody that I didn't respect who they were as people first. I didn't care what their performance was.
Okay. Good. Okay. So another question, you mentioned the importance of using servant leadership while still getting results. What advice would you give us as aspiring leaders who want to use servant leadership but struggle to be assertive?
Well, see, that's a misnomer. You can be assertive as a servant leader. There's nowhere in the book on servant leadership that says don't be assertive, right? As a matter of fact, you should be assertive, but with love in your heart, right? With caring, all those things, but you should be assertive. If you believe in servant leadership, then you ought to pound it on the table. You ought to talk about it. You ought to sell it. And first of all, you got to do it yourself and set the example. And, that's how you do it within an organization that isn't servant led. You just do it in your area and you figure out what that
Yeah.
means to you. And then you start acting that way. And soon somebody says, what are they doing? And your people are happy. If you're in a leadership role, your people are feeling, they're feeling challenged and they're happy and they're getting stuff done and they enjoy being with each other. And all of a sudden people want to know what you're doing. And then it goes to the next step. And that's how it works. It just kind of builds on itself. Somebody has to plant the seed. Now it's easier if the leadership of the company believes in servant leadership and drives it through the company. I mean, there's just no question about it because it's easier to get the resources, put it to work. But anybody can do it. It's how you live your life.
Okay. But many of our students, I mean, this is going to be their first job. They're going to be in a corporation or an organization that may not embrace servant leadership. So if you got advice to them about how they can make sure that they practice that, they ingrain it into their lives in a way that helps, so it affects the organization as their career progresses.
Everybody here is is their first or second year MBA or most or students, maybe some undergraduate students. If you have to write down your personal mission statement, you have to write down your values. Because if you don't write them down, it's just wishes, hopes, and dreams. And then you have to define what they are, and then you have to start living by them. And look you can decide where you go to work. There's not a person here that's a victim. I wouldn't go to work at any place that I hadn't checked out their values and their mission and hadn't asked the question, what's the gap between what they say they are and what they actually are? And do those values mesh with mine? See, I mean, one of the questions I'd be asking is what happens before you join a company? I'd be talking to people who work in the company. They'd ask a question to somebody who works in the company. What happens in this company if you make a mistake? What are the penalties? Who gets rewarded in this company? Is it the political people or is it the people that care about other people and turn in the result? So you ask the questions around your values and then you're looking for companies that mesh with those. I mean, it doesn't help you to go to work in a company where your values are already in conflict with who you are. But first of all, you need to know who you are.
Yeah.
Right? When I joined Grand Tree Furniture Rental, I might not, if I would have written my values down, I had probably checked it out. I might not have gone to work there because I'd have known that it was being led by a guy that was more autocratic in nature. And that wasn't where I wanted to be. You have to do your work. Finding a job is a job. Finding the right company to work for is a job. It takes effort, it takes energy, and it takes persistence. And you got to do the work to figure out if it's the right place for you. Now, somebody's going to say to us here, yeah, but I got to have a job. I'm just getting out of college. I got to support myself. I think that's a fictitious trade-off. It's not either or, it's the and. You can do both. You can have a job that pays you well and a place that you like to work that shares your values.
Okay. All right. Good. Let's see. Gabriel, have you changed another leader's view on servant leadership? And if so, how did you convince them to change their view on this topic?
Starbucks. I started at Starbucks. It was a tiny company. It was 28 stores. Howard Schultz was a young entrepreneur. He was, at the time, kind of had a hard edge to him. Kind of was, I'd call him the blamer in chief. And if something was wrong, it was somebody out there. It was the store manager. It was the barista. I was the opposite of that. If something went wrong, I always thought, what haven't I done? People understood. Doesn't mean that I took all the blame all the time. I held people accountable, but I had to convince Howard that it was the way to act, that he would get a lot more from his people if he treated them with more respect and more dignity than he was doing. And it didn't take him very long to watch me in action. Now I had a senior position in this little tiny company, so I could do it, and I just drove it. I was trying to get people to understand what this was really about. And I coined this phrase. It's alive in Starbucks still today. And it goes like this. Not in the coffee business serving people, but we're in the people business. And it sounded like a small play on words, but it's been a driving force inside of Starbucks. And Howard caught on to that, and he became a true believer, and he became an outstanding servant leader. So you got to be, but I took risks. It wasn't without battles, let me tell you. It wasn't like you said, okay. I mean, there were some yelling and screaming matches, and I'm an emotional guy, and I'd get mad at him if I thought he didn't treat somebody with respect, and I'd say you could do better than that. And they used to call him the evil eye. I used to tell him, Howard, because he'd go into stores, he'd always find something wrong. I said, Howard, if you see something wrong, write it down, call me anytime at night. They need you to care about them and find something that's right in the store. And you can tell me what's wrong and I'll get it fixed. And it was just a difference. And, that became how we became a servant-led company, because he believed at the end of the day.
Okay. So another question, how can servant leadership contribute to a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive company culture?
Well, at its foundation, it's about serving people. That means all the people. And servant, I don't think Robert Greenleaf thought about diversity when he was doing his work. Just those days, in the 50s, 60s, it wasn't where he went. But in today's world, he would probably be the first one to say, this fits into servant leadership. And we have to do this work. And I always believed if you want a diverse organization, you had to set goals. You're not going to just happen. Right? You can't just think about it and have it happen. You had to set goals. You had to drive. You had to help people along the way. You had to help people of color get opportunities within the organizations. You had to give them mentors, and you had to make sure they're getting promoted and getting paid the same as other people. I mean, Starbucks was not perfect yet. I'll tell you a great story about that. This was early on. We had a couple hundred stores, and we used to have what's called open forums. And these were meetings where everybody would come together and you could ask any question you want. There would be a presentation on what was going on in the company, and then we'd open it up to the audience and to all the employees or partners, we call them. And so people would ask questions. Well, one day we were all the officers sitting up front in these bar stools like we usually did. A young African-American man stood up. His name was Daryl Collins. I'm still a friend of his today. And this guy is 28 years ago. And he looked at us and he said, when am I going to see a face like mine sitting on one of those bar stools? I mean, there were about 500 people in this room. The room went dead silent. That old proverbial saying, you could have heard a pin drop. You really could have heard a pin drop, because in those days, when that kind of question came up, nobody knew what to say, particularly a bunch of white faces in there. And God bless Howard Schultz. And he stood up and he said, Daryl, I really appreciate that question. I don't know the answer to that, but I need your help in making that happen. And so Daryl became a driver of that. And we went out and we got some help, because we didn't know what we were doing. We were a young company at the time. We weren't thinking so much about diversity. We were thinking about survival. And but we went on that journey. And, we made some mistakes. We've done some things well. But if you look at the company today, a very diverse company, we just lost two people from Atlanta. They were both African-American women. Her name was Zinga. I forget Zinga's last name, but she is working for one of the headhunter firms or human resource firms in Atlanta. And another woman named Roz, who just is the president and just left to be the CEO at a big drugstore chain. So we got to start the process all over again. But we still have a lot of senior people, diverse senior people. And we publish the results. We are open with it. Okay, how many people, what different races are represented, genders are represented, are there any gaps in pay? And we publish all of that. There's nothing hidden. So everybody knows the company and everybody knows that side. And that's the only way you can make it happen. But servant leadership is a part of
that. Yeah, good. Dennis asked, could you please name a few other servant leadership role models and what makes them stand out?
Yeah, well, I think there's one that a few. One, Chip was the founder of Container Store, and he is a conscious capitalist and a servant leader. John Mackey, who is the founder of Whole Foods, servant leader. Jim Senegal, who was one of the co-founders of Costco, along with Jeff Brotman, both servant leaders. What's the guy from Texas that was on our board that had that big company in Texas? Anyway,
we're about forgetting.
There's thousands of servant leaders. They may not call themselves servant leaders, but they act like a servant leader. In other words, they understand that their role in life will not be served by their people.
Okay. And that brings me to something else too, the language of servant leadership. I often talk to students about when you go out for your first job, it might not be the best thing to say.
Hey there? Technology.
Howard, I'm getting on this right now. Go ask the question. So let me give you the next question until Bob comes back. Lindsay asked, I'd love to hear how you protected the culture of Starbucks as it was growing, servant leadership and taking care of people. How did it remain core to your business as you grew?
Well, you had to make it core. I mean, there were two things I'd talk about. If I was giving a speech or I was being interviewed in the newspaper or on television, the only two things I talk about. Number one, the people. Number two, the coffee. I don't care what you ask me, you're going to hear about those two things. Now, there might be some other stuff along the way, but then I would drive that within the organization. I went from a guy in the early days of Starbucks to having to have my fingers in everything, to a guy that only had his fingers in the people side. I was relentless about that. And everybody knew that that's what mattered there. And we held people accountable. That's the only way. Performance matters in terms of how you treat people. And so we were ferocious about that. And that no matter where we were in the world, and we open now in 90 some countries. Are we a perfect organization? No, not even close. But for the most part, I think they've done a great job but you have to drive it. It has to be, it was the number one thing on my agenda. I always said the people are my day job, the business.
I appreciate hearing you mention that because, again, it ties into everything you've mentioned on having both of those at the core of everything you've mentioned. A follow-up question is, servant leadership is such an attractive philosophy. Why do you think there are only a few, or is it a misconception, of the Fortune 500 practicing it?
Well, I think there's probably more than a few, Fortune. 500 that are practicing it. I don't know what the numbers are. They wouldn't call it that, but they're good to their people. They care about their people, and so they just don't call it servant leadership. But I think, people are more comfortable with autocratic leadership. You know, oh, I don't know. People are more comfortable with autocratic style, and they go to business school, sorry, and unless they're taught something different, that's what they're comfortable with. And so, it comes from growing as a human being. If you think about our lives, we're 11 months old, we see a coffee table out in the middle of the floor in our parents' home, and on the coffee table is this beautiful vase with bright colored flowers, and it's a nice crystal vase, and it's just glistening in the sunlight. Get up on our little haunches, and we're crawling towards that vase, get to the coffee table, and we put our little hands up and reach up, and we go to grab that vase, and that's from the back of the room says, no, don't touch that. It's the first time that we realize there's a power other than ourselves, right? That word no. And you can't do that. No, you got to be home by 10 o'clock. You got to be home by midnight. Or no, you can't do this. Or no, you can't. Or teacher says you're not capable. Or whatever it happens to be. And so we can hardly wait until we get to the opportunity in life we're able to say no. And that's the beginning of autocratic leadership. And that's kind of where we come from. And we have to fight that. We have to fight those instincts. And it's not always easy because you get under stress, and something bad's happen, and immediately, our whatever it is, our subconscious takes over, and it's fight or flight, and so the bad stuff comes out. But the mark of leadership is learning to grow past that, and it's not easy. But I think more and more and more, the internet has made a huge difference. Okay, I'll take you through the companies. Look at what happened to Wells Fargo. Because of how they led. They were not a servant-led company. They were a greedy company. Look what happened to Uber. The guy that founded Uber got kicked out of there because he was a jerk. He was terrible to his people. He got kicked out of there. The guy that did WeWork, same kind of thing. I can go on and on, but all of a sudden, that's coming up out of the end of the people can see it. They hear it. They see it. And they're gone. You can't hide anymore. You can't hide. And, when Starbucks does something wrong, man, it's in the paper, right away, and so you can't hide. And we've done plenty of wrong things. So, that's the good part of the internet. There's some things that aren't so good, but that's a good thing. You can't hide. And so I think more of that is going to help us develop more servant leaders. And there's more people that are beginning to understand that it makes a difference. We have in my backyard, I was raised in Seattle, live in Seattle part-time. And we have Microsoft. Microsoft was not a servant-led company. Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer were kind of assholes, to tell you the truth. They were abusive to their people. If somebody came with an idea that they didn't like or they thought was dumb, they'd tell them, that's the stupidest damn idea. Get out of my office. Well, that went on for a period of time until people started leaving. And all of a sudden, Microsoft lost 15 years of performance. So a new guy comes in and he takes over. He was there, by the way, leading an organization inside of Microsoft. And he changes the whole dynamic of the organization to be a people-centric company. He didn't change much else. They're already going on cloud services and all that stuff. He just made it that, hey, we're about people. We're going to treat people with respect and dignity here. And all of a sudden now, Microsoft turns around and people want to work there again. And that's all he did. I don't know that he would call himself a servant leader, but that's who he is. But so, we're seeing more and more. I'm a true believer. So, I think we're going to get more and more. I think over the next 25 years, it's going to be the outliers that aren't servant leaders. Even in the military service, right? They're in that mode. There are times when they're autocratic. If there's something that, a bomb has come or something like that, or people's lives at stake, but, they've come to the conclusion that they can't just tell people what to do, right?
Howard, you shared a story once in a meeting I heard. You were talking about your annual review with your wife, and how that relates to what we do in HR so often. Do you mind sharing that?
Well, the joke of that is that I come home and I bring a really nice bottle of wine or favorite Pinot Noir, and I buy two really expensive Riedel glasses. You know, the $60 kind, right? And I say, hey, honey, I bought your favorite wine. Come sit in the living room and let's have a glass of wine. Sits down, I pour a glass of wine, and she sips it. I say, isn't that good? And then I look at it and I say, honey, this is your lucky day. This is going to be your annual. You know, as my ass is bouncing out the door, right? You can imagine if you did that at home. It's not how life works, right? You know, performance reviews are every day, right? When you have a great relationship, you don't hold things back. You're communicating effectively every day because great communication builds great organization. Great communication builds trust. And the one thing you have to have, whether it's in a family organization, in a marriage, or with children, or in a business organization or a nonprofit, you got to have trust. You got to have caring, and you got to have great communication. And so, but we have every year we go away and we have this planning session, and it's called the Behar Family Retreat. And we haven't done it for a couple of years actually. We've been talking about we got to get back at it, but you get a little lazy as you get older, you know. And and what we do is we go away and all those headings that I talked about, spiritual. Let's see if I have my. Oh yeah, here. So this is my little book, my little folder that has my 5-year plan in it. And so you know we have here are the goals and objectives for 2018 through 2020. And here were the headings. It was Lynn, which is my wife, my family, kids, grandkids, in-laws, brothers and sisters, friendships, economic and material goals, travel, personal growth, health, physical, mental, hobbies, spiritual work, spiritual, and life's work. And then we go in our separate spaces. Go rent a hotel room and we take whiteboards with us with the slips of paper that have that sticky on the back, big sheets of paper. We each put the headings on these pieces of paper. And then we write out what our top 2 or 3 goals are. And then we come back and we present to each other. And you can only ask clarifying questions. You cannot say that's a stupid goal. That gets you in trouble. Okay? So you can ask clarifying questions like, what do you mean by that? So I'll give you some of the goals so I had, this was family. This was visit our parents at least once a month. Plan a trip with our kids. Maintain my relationship with my brother and sister. Then take each one of our grandchildren on a trip of their own so we got to know them better. And that was family stuff. Life's work. For me, it was I wanted to serve on a University of Washington Foundation. At that time, I was on the Greenleaf board. I served on a couple of for-profit boards. I was going to write a second book called The Magic Cup, and I had it written down here, The Magic Cup, a no or go decision by June 1st. And then trying to get University of Washington to develop a leadership program called Me to We. And I wasn't so successful at that, but so that's what we do. And then that's how we live our life, because I've always believed if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. And so, I want to have a path. I don't want to wake up at 85 years old and say, what the hell did I do with my life? I may not have done all the best things. I may not have got everything I wanted to get done, but at least have a plan, whatever it is. You can change it anytime you want,
Yeah, that's great advice. So it turns out we've got a poll that 17% of our audience had never heard of servant leadership, and 57% have taken a class on it, and 26% are practicing it at their companies. So for those students that have heard of servant leadership or now think it's this is something I want to do, what advice would you have for them about really ingraining it into their lives? Because as you said, we hit these stones in the river and throws us off, and it's easy to go back to power. And
I'd read a book a month on servant leadership or on leadership, on conscious capitalism or servant leadership. There are so many great books out there, and we know them, from Jim Autry, great book on servant leadership. He also wrote a great book called Love and Profit, which revolves around servant leadership, only he didn't call it. There's, there's just tons of them. There's Greenleaf's pamphlets and books. There's the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership has lots of materials. Look up online and look at the books they suggest. And, maybe there'll be some seminars that you can take or workshops. I think they even have one online that you can take on servant leadership. And you'll learn about it. And then start making habits out of little things. Take one thing in servant leadership, try to make it a habit within your life. And then take a second, then take a third, and you stay with it. And before you know it, you're doing the thing. And servant leadership isn't prescriptive, so to speak. You can be the kind of servant leader you want to be. Make it part of you. You don't have to, you can learn what other people do. You can copy it for a while, but then you got to make it your own. And you'll change things and you'll figure out how to act because we're all individuals. We should always make it our own.
good. Let's see, any more questions? Yeah, that was the question about practicing early in the career. So as we're ending up, any more questions from the audience? Well, I want to finish with this one. We wake up every morning and it seems like, there's a lot of things going on in the world, and crisis that sometimes seem insurmountable. So what is it that gives you hope?
The people on this call, young people, the world is changing. They know more about the world and about living than I ever did. At my age, I never thought about it. I was just trying to make a living, until I kind of attached to things. And they're more aware, of things going on. When you look at the research numbers today, the kids that understand diversity today, we never thought about diversity growing up. Now they're aware, they want to do good things, they want the world to be a better place for all people. And you see that all over. Are there people that don't? Sure, there always will be. And I see people doing things and making things happen and caring. And that gives me hope. It's been a tough 4 years for me, let me tell you. But because it has gone against everything that I believe in. But I see hope and I see it coming around, and I hope that we are able to get better. And I'm going to leave you with a quote that I love, and I have looked at this a zillion times. And so here it is. For what it's worth, it's never too late, or in my case, too early to be whoever you want to be. There is no time limit. Stop whenever you want. You can change or stay the same. There are no rules to this thing. You can make the best or the worst of it. I hope that you make the best of it. And I hope that you see things that startle you. I hope you feel things that you've never felt before. I hope you meet people with a different point of view. I hope you live a life you're proud of. And if you find that you're not, I hope you have the strength to start all over again. It's never too late or too early to be whoever you want to be.